Welcome to my talk, The 5 Love Languages of DevOps. So who am I? So before, my name is Matt Stratton. I'm Senior Solution Architect at Chef Software. I live in Chicago. Chef is based in Seattle. We're all over the place. Ta-da. If you want to learn more about Chef, we have a fancy little table, and we have lots of swag, so come see me and stuff. I am the co-host of the Arrested DevOps podcast. So if you're into podcasts and DevOps, then you should listen to it. And you should come by the Chef table or just see me at some point and get a sticker for your laptop. We actually have an episode that should be releasing in the next couple days. It's about seasonal scaling. So we had Rob Cummings from Nordstrom, and I don't remember his name, who's at Allstate now, but was at PayPal. I wasn't on this episode, and they talked about like things they're doing for seasonal stuff, and it's really cool. I'm one of the co-organizers of DevOps Days Chicago, so I know everything that your organizers have gone through to put this event on, and I'm super impressed, and I'm really proud and humbled to be one of your speakers today. And yeah, that's my license plate, so if you see the Illinois DevOps license plate, that's me, so I definitely buy into this bullshit. And I never put my Twitter name on this slide, and I don't know why. I haven't fixed that yet, but it's easy. It's at Matt Stratton, and that's kind of where I am everywhere that you want to find me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is this DevOps thing anyway, and I kind of bring this up because I give this talk to lots of different kinds of people, and I always find that at DevOps Days, well, first of all, I'm just going to ask a question. How many people here, this is your first DevOps Days event, first time being at a DevOps Days? This is actually super common, even for in places that like Austin or Silicon Valley that have been doing them for 5 years. So many people, it's their first time, which is awesome. And the point is, so some of this may be a little bit repetitive. Some people may have been, hey, I've been jamming on this DevOps thing for a couple years. I read our DevOps on Reddit, and I listen to the Ship Show and DevOps Cafe, and I'm just gonna say that's okay, because maybe not everybody knows all these things. But we're gonna get some common vocabulary, so at least we're speaking somewhat of the same language. So a while ago, when I was writing this talk in the spring, my first time I put out there and had people tweet with the hashtag DevOps is not. So these are just some examples of what DevOps is not. So DevOps is not copy-pasting answers from Stack Overflow. It's not just reading the Phoenix project, although you should read the Phoenix project. It's not a full stack 10 times rockstar engineer, and that goes back into something Cote was talking about as well. It's not just developers on call, and it's not your effing khakis. That's my favorite one. What we kind of think about a little bit, and this is for me, this is what I think DevOps is, and I happen to agree with the way that it's been put out into play kind of on the Chef side. So I believe this not because it's what, I always say that I work at Chef because I believe in Chef. It's not the other way around, so I'm not spouting the corporate crap. This is why I still work there, because they agree with me. But we kind of look at it as saying that DevOps is fundamentally a cultural and professional movement which is focused on building and operating high-velocity organizations. And it's born from experience of the practitioners. That's what's in something called Chef-style DevOps. Adam Jacob, the guy on the right, who's the founder of Chef, he gave a talk last year about it. You'll see the links. You can go watch it. It's super fun and super cool. But what does this mean is that it's not just about culture. It's not just about automation. And it's really something that maybe was created by web practitioners and tech practitioners. Maybe this was born out of the unicorns, but it's really adopted by everybody. And that's a lot of what Cote was talking about. So at this point, equine metaphors aside, everybody's a sparkly horse is the way that I look at it. And so, but the difference is everybody thinks about things a little different. So there's a book out there by a guy named Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. And I've read part of it. But the gist, and I like the idea, I read enough, and I think I'm going to get this right, that actually this is going to sound like I'm like the biggest Cote fanboy in the world, but I kind of am a little bit. I think Cote might have been the one who made this reference, or if not, it was someone else on one of his shows who said that pretty much, almost every business book can be kind of summarized in like its first 10 pages. You just have to read like maybe the introduction of a business book and you probably get everything you need out of it. I kind of felt that way with the 5 love languages. But the gist is that everybody has a different way that they communicate love to different people, right? And so those 5 are, words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, physical touch. And that's as much as you need to know about the specifics of that. But the point is that there's different ways. And obviously if my girlfriend, identified like the language she speaks is around like acts of affirmation, and mine is around receiving gifts, then I'm going to like say, oh, the way that I show you I love you is I'm going to buy you like an Apple Watch. And she's going to be like, I don't really care about that, but you're not actually speaking language I want. And the gist of it is, you can't expect other people to change their language to yours. You have to learn how to speak their language, which is funny, I guess, if both you and your partner are reading the book at the same time, then maybe I don't know what happens. Maybe that's in the part of the book I didn't read. But what does this actually have to do with shipping software? You're like, I didn't come to like your self-help seminar, Stratton, let's talk about like, software. So one of the things you'll find, we talk a lot about this word called empathy in DevOps. In fact, to the point that some people who consider themselves the enterprise DevOps people will actually make fun of it, right? And this is their dig, right? Oh, it's DevOps Days is all about empathy and it's all that hippie hug ops bullshit. And the thing is, really, empathy does matter. And all that empathy means is kind of having an understanding of what someone else is going through, right? And not sympathy, not a matter of, oh yeah, that must suck, but actually understand it. And the reason that matters is not so we can be great people that work great together. That's important, but it helps us design solutions and understand process, because I have to understand where my stuff begins and ends and yours does and where they overlap. And the thing is, so their book, The 5 Love Languages, is basically about being empathetic, right? So, but the thing is, what's really important is we need to talk, so that's great, so empathy is important. We spent all of DevOps Days 2014 at every conference talking about how important empathy was. Well, we need to talk, that's great, we need to talk about how, right? How can we be more empathetic rather than saying, go make with the empathy. Next. And that was Kevin Bear, who's one of the authors of the Phoenix Project. I wish I had the exact quote, but he said something to the effect of, if I see one more DevOps talk about empathy without any science backing it, I'm going to table flip. Well, I don't really have science, but at least I pretend. So that's better. So I'm going to use a definition or a way of talking about DevOps called CALMS. You may have also heard it referred to as CAMS. And basically where this comes from is after the first US-based DevOps Days, which was in Mountain View in 2010, Damon Edwards and John Willis kind of came up with this term CAMS. And if you hear them tell the story, it was a thing they came up with at the bar writing on the back of a napkin. And, as all great things are, they kind of come out of nowhere. And really, CAMS stands for Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. A little bit later, Jez Humble added an L, standing for Lean, which makes it turn into CALMS. My friend Jason Hand at VictorOps thinks it stands for Learning. It's okay, we're still friends. He could be wrong. It absolutely still can, but for purposes of my talk, we're going to talk about it as meaning lean. So we'll start with the C, which is culture. So, oh my goodness. Did I step on the... Okay, so I have trouble standing still. So I might have to force myself to stand still to not do that again. Okay, it's back. Okay. I'll do my best here. Okay. So, culture. So, a lot of people are going to tell you that culture doesn't matter. In fact, there's a gentleman who I generally have a fair amount of respect for, but on this particular aspect I don't, he's in that enterprise DevOps camp, early spouting that there's a difference. I don't think there is. I think DevOps is for everyone. But he is fond of saying culture is for yogurt. And I don't care for the dismissive thing. So culture is important because culture is the people. People are doing the work. And so a fellow named J. Paul Reed has talked about that it's not important to change your culture, but mostly to ensure that your culture is consistent. And that's absolutely true because it's very difficult to change the culture of an organization, no matter how big it is. This is not like a JP Morgan Chase versus, like my 10-person startup difference. Actually, the JP Morgan Chase may be easier than the small startup. Sometimes, in order to make a massive change to culture, that can usually happen when you bring in brand new executive management that can come and lay down edicts and things like that. The good thing is, it's not about making these 180-degree changes to our culture. The thing that's more important than anything else is making sure that that culture is consistent and aligned with what's important to the organization. Because also that culture can have a lot to do with the personality of the organization, and that's really what's driving that. So organizations have different personalities, and you could probably identify the one that is. There's one, for example, a common personality type of an organization is consensus. And if you work for a company where you have meetings about meetings to decide if you should have a meeting about a meeting, you work in a consensus-oriented organization. And where it gets challenging is when organizations think their personality is one type, but it's another. That's where that consistency comes in. I worked for a company like that who we believed that we were a result-oriented organization, and a result-oriented organization is, as its name would imply, one who's like about let's get a result, let's ship, let's sell, let's do all this stuff. But the reality was when you deconstruct it, we were absolutely a consensus-based organization. And we spent so much time making sure that everybody felt good about everything together. And I'm not saying people shouldn't, but it was more of the, are you sure? Are you sure? Well, let's check with them. Let's check with them. We actually never had any results. And so we kind of had this split brain problem. So the first thing is understand the personality of your organization and make sure you're aligned to that, and then figure out how we're going to enable the behaviors. And that's the thing, right? So Lloyd Taylor's a VP of infrastructure at Jamoco says, you know, you can't directly change culture. You can't just say, our culture is now this. I don't care if you're Jamie Dimon at Chase, right? You can't say, guess what, here's the culture. And I will give you an example of why you can't do that, or why that doesn't work. And feel bad if Jamie Dimon is watching this, because he's getting picked on an awful lot, which is funny. I worked for Chase, so that's why my thought comes in here. But I had a director at a job after I left Chase who happened to run in the same social circles as Jamie Dimon, and happened to be sitting, apparently a pretty cool guy, right? He was at a dinner and was talking to Jamie, said, how do you attribute to your success? And he said, don't hire assholes. And I heard this story and I was like, yeah, that maybe is your direct hires, but I've worked with a lot of people at Chase. So the thing is the point is you can't dictate it, right? But what you can do is you can change behavior. And behavior is what drives culture and what becomes culture. And how do we change behavior? We change behavior by changing incentives. So it depends a lot on how we're incenting. So we can think about a couple different ways of how we, and even those incentives may be counterintuitive. A good example of this is that at Etsy. So Etsy has a culture they like to, and a type of behavior they like to reward. And one example of that would be we want to reward transparency. That's generally true of Etsy in general. They, think about if you've ever heard them people talk about blameless postmortems and how they're transparent at Etsy. That's an important behavior they want to reinforce. So they incent for it. And a couple examples of that. Actually, one that's kind of cool is, so let's say you're an Etsy employee and you get an email and it's got a phishing link in it and you accidentally click on it and you cause a security problem. So you go to the security team, you say, hey, man, I totally screwed up and I clicked on this link and, my password phished. And what happens, the security team doesn't go, you idiot, why do you click on links? Don't you know better, blah, blah, blah. They say, here's a $25 Etsy gift card. Thank you for telling us. Because it encourages transparency, because it says, hey, it's going to happen. People are going to mess up. But if you don't tell me, we have a much bigger problem. Similarly, they give out, I think it's monthly, what they call the 3-arm sweater award. It's basically the person that screwed up production the worst. And it's not a like, ha-ha, make fun of you award. It's actually we celebrate this together because we all win it and we all look at that. And they're incenting to say this is important to do that. So you think about the behavior that we want. If we think about, I'm going to talk a little bit later about cross incentives that we tend to have in a traditional IT organization, how we can change those. So we talk a little bit about automation. So we don't really need to go too much into depth on this. Automation is kind of self-explanatory. This could mean something like Chef or Puppet or Ansible or Salt or whatever is the latest and greatest thing, right? Letting robots do what robots are good at and humans do what humans are good at. The reality is you want to automate your process up to the point that direct human intervention is necessary because humans are slow. And the reality is that the areas that actually truly require human intervention are a lot less than you think. Great quote from the book Continuous Delivery, which is now showing its teeth a little bit, but still very accurate. And this quote is absolutely true. And it boils down to say anytime you're asking experts to do boring and repetitive tasks, but that are technically demanding, it's the most certain way of introducing error, short of sleep deprivation or inebriation. This is the problem with a lot of the manual stuff we have to do in technology, right? Your ops folks are doing really boring things, but you have to be really technically adept to do them. And you combine those two things and it's a recipe for screw up. So we let the robots do those things. And Code alluded to this as well, or talked about this as well, which automation is not a headcount reduction technique. At least it shouldn't be. It's never a headcount reduction play. And the reason for this that I find, and again, my background is in ops, I come from the ops side of DevOps, so to speak, is before I was at Chef and I was doing infrastructure consulting and continuous delivery type consulting and going out and helping organizations, I would go out and I would talk to different stakeholders. I'd sit down, talk to the QA people, talk to the product people, talk to the devs, talk to the test, talk to ops. And one of the questions I asked everybody is I said, I've got a magic IT wand and you get one wish. What's your one wish? Well, devs in company A would have a different wish than devs in company B, and the QA testers in this company would have a different than that. Every single ops person, almost every single one had the exact same wish. And that wish was more people in ops. And the thing is, you're not going to get more people in ops. But the reason they wanted more people in ops was because they didn't have any time to do the important stuff because they were doing the bullshit. So what you do is you say, well, we can throw people at it, which is not going to happen, or we can reduce the level of crap you have to do that a robot can be good at, and then this lets you go ahead, and that's the reason for automation. The reason for automation is to enable your already skilled people to be able to leverage their skills appropriately to drive value to the business. And again, going back to Etsy, they're an incredibly automated shop, right? And people will ask John Allspaw, who's their SVP of Ops over there, and say, John, why do you even have an ops team? And he says, are you kidding? They have so much work to do. And they're doing all this stuff around making their services more reliable and performant and all this stuff, all the things that an ops person would love to spend their time doing rather than doing a lot of, copying files around and editing templates. So talk a little bit about lean thinking. It's a business methodology that lets us think about how we organize our activities to deliver more value. And it was coined by James P. Womack and Daniel T. Jones. It's basically the correlate, kind of the essence of when they studied the Toyota production system. So when I think about it in terms of DevOps, it's really looking at waste and then also looking at how it enables us to be able to be more experiment focused. And again, to reiterate, I swear, I would say this stuff even if Cote didn't. He referenced the book Lean Enterprise at the end of his talk, if you want to go into great detail about that. Talk about measurement is what the M stands for, and this is important because it's how do we know that we've been successful if we don't collect metrics? How do we know that we've moved the needle if we don't know what the needle looks like? And you need to start measuring at the beginning of your transition because you can't go back in time and collect information you didn't know you wanted later, right? So we need to know what are the things that are important, and that boils down to setting success criteria because your DevOps is going to look different than my DevOps is going to look different than your DevOps. How do you know that in your business, because just for me, say, shortening, ship time, having, what does my cycle time look like? What's important to my business? What's my driver? And then finally, we talk about sharing. Again, we talk about transparency is key. How many people have read the book, The Phoenix Project? Okay, no Brents. So, single point of failure. No person who knows all the things. And my friend and former colleague, Sasha Rosenbaum, actually just gave a talk at DevOps Days, Silicon Valley, and I think it's online, and it's called Single Person of Failure. And it talks about this particular problem, so I recommend that. So the thing is, also you want to share the why you're doing things. Mandates are bad, so if you are in the position to be dictating, don't. Explain why. And this is a thing that happens quite a bit as we go up the echelon of management, is we feel like, oh, well, I can't tell you the why because it's protected and there's going to be all this argument and all this stuff. And again, just like the areas that require human intervention are fewer than you think, the areas where you have to keep your cards to your vest are much fewer. Yeah, maybe NDA, right? Maybe there's an acquisition going on. But you really should be sharing the why because people will buy into it a lot more if they understand. And a blameless postmortem cannot happen in a culture without sharing. So, what? So what does this actually have to do with anything? And this is how it ties together. So each of those things, so each comms are each a DevOps love language. That's a big part of the reason, by the way, that I included the L, because then I have 5. I usually always just talk about CAMs, so little secret to that. But what this means is, it's really important, again, like we talked about in the 5 love languages, it's much more important for me to learn to talk to people I'm communicating with and I'm trying to convince than for them to learn how to listen to me. So let's say I'm trying to drive a transformation in my organization. I've got a lot of people that I have to convince to do work this way. So I bought into it. I've come to DevOps days. I've listened to the podcasts. I've read the books. I totally understand why this makes sense. And now I'm going and I'm trying to convince my VP of development, or I'm trying to convince the DBAs over here, or the testers, the security folks, and they don't get it. And I'm pounding my head against the wall, and I'm saying to myself, it's crystal clear. Why don't you get it? The reality is, if you ever find yourself saying, this is crystal clear to me, why aren't they seeing it? The problem's with you. It's not with them. Because, again, my DevOps love language might be different than yours. It's not enough to get someone to do it. They have to understand the value in their own language. So Patrick Dubois, who was one of the people who arguably coined the term DevOps, you could say it was Patrick or Andrew Schaefer, but anyway, you should all know who Patrick is. About a year or two ago said, we should rename DevOps to common sense. And I said, no, you can't do that because I would have to get new license plates. But that's sort of the problem, right? We think, like, once you get DevOps, you're like, yeah, this is just common sense. Or people say, I've been doing that all along. I just call it work. Well, if common sense is usually in the eye of the beholder, right? It's a relative term, and it all becomes common sense once you understand it. So let's think about how we identify somebody's particular DevOps love language, right? What are the things we can do to understand how I'm going to talk to them? So one of the things that helps is you want to think about their communication style in general. And so a tool for doing that is something called DISC. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs, it's similar to that. I like to talk about DISC because it's easy to do a relatively quick assessment of someone. Again, not like put them in a little box, but I can kind of spend a little bit of time talking to you and I'll understand where you fall in that. And basically you fall somewhere in a quadrant based upon D stands for either dominant or direct, depending on how nice you want to be, I guess. Influencing, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And what I found is that depending upon your communication style, it actually influences which DevOps love language makes sense to you. Now, again, your quick assessment of someone on the DISC scale could be wrong. So, for example, if someone is direct, the things that resonate to them more are the lean and the measurement parts of DevOps, of comms. Because if you're focused on direct, you are a results-driven person. You are we'll figure it out along the way, let's just get going kind of person. I am a high D. Fortunately, when I managed a team, they were not Ds, and that's a really good balance because they help you not run off the cliff. So someone who's a D wants to see how the change you're doing here is going to move the ball forward. And they're also likely to be more influenced by experimentation because they're like, okay, again, I just want to see the result. I don't really care how we get there, and we'll go as we go. You start preaching culture or automation to a D, and they don't care about it as much because they don't care how the sausage gets made. They're like, that's fine, automate it, do whatever you have to do, but results, right? And show me on the graph. Show me that we did some stuff after we're done. I don't care along the way. Influencing, so people who are high Is tend to be more social communicators, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're more friendly, or anything like that, but they interact more, and they respond more on the culture and sharing side of comms. So Is tend to like consensus, and they like collaboration. So if you're someone who's in that kind of a model, they're going to get a lot more and say, like, okay, cool, well, we're doing this thing, we're culture, and we're sharing our information. That makes a lot of sense. You talk about things like lean, or automation, and the results-oriented stuff, especially automation, tends to not resonate to someone who's an I. Steadiness. So steadiness are folks who like stability, right? And it doesn't mean that they fear change. When I talk about S's, I always think about Garth from Wayne's World going, we fear change. That's not an S. An S just likes to understand stability. And they want to be sure about change and be comfortable about it rather than just do it. So automation resonates really well with S's because it gives a lot of safety, right? A lot of understanding of what's going to happen. And then measurement is really resonant to an S because, again, I know what's going on. I can understand what happened with that. Lean is probably the antithesis of S, right? Because it's talking about making a lot of experimental change. The end result of lean thinking actually is really good. S's will really like what the process looks like when it's done, but getting there that way, that can be kind of scary, or at least uncomfortable. And then conscientious. So conscientious folks are what I call the, measure 15 times, cut once, right? We're going to be absolutely sure. Not to make stereotypes or anything, most operations people are C's. Most data people are C's. That's why, like, when I managed an ops team, it was great that I was a high D and they were all high C's. Because you get a whole bunch of C's, no change gets made because we want to measure every single thing and be absolutely sure about all of our data before we do it. And a D goes, I don't care, let's just figure it out. So we help each other. But again, so sharing and measurement actually help a lot with C's because they want all the information. They love data. So culture is less of an impact as well. Automation is helpful, but only as it drives the measurement. So if you know someone, if you're working with someone that you're trying to get them to understand why this change is helpful, and you know they're a data-driven person, don't go talk about like, hey, we're going to be empathetic and hug ops and all this stuff, because they don't give a shit. But talk about how we're going to be able to see the needle move. We're going to be able to see results, and we're going to make decisions based on results, and they will love it. So this is important. So we need to assess the drivers. You need to understand why. What makes a person tick. And so there's a great book called by Daniel Pink called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And like, again, we talked about all business books. You could actually just watch his TED Talk for free and not have to buy the book and get almost all the value out of it, and the link will be at the end. But it's about understanding what's important, because again, what's important to me is going to be different than to you, not just because of our communication style, but what makes us get out of bed in the morning. What makes us do things? Am I recognition oriented? Do I do things because I want to get lots of followers on Twitter and have everybody retweet me a lot and quote me and call me a great expert? Hint, hint, yes. Or do I like to get paid, right? Like, is money a motivator to me? Because it is to people, to some people, but to others it's not. And it can be a matter of saying, if you're not a money motivated person, me saying, okay, if you do this thing, I'm going to give you a huge raise. I mean, no one's going to say like, oh no, do not give me money. But that's not necessarily going to make me really make a change in how I work. Or punishing me by taking money away may not have an impact. So you need to understand what drives a person. And this is really kind of tricky because we also think about conflicting incentives come into place when we think about the drivers. Besides the personal drivers, think about the drivers that your organization has kind of influenced into that behavior. So traditionally, you think about how are development teams incented? They're incented by shipping features, right? You ship more features. The more features you ship, the better deving you're doing. And how are ops teams incented? Uptime. The more the system is up, the better you're doing. I had a colleague who was a director of ops who her bonus was a percentage of the site's uptime. Now, what causes uptime to go down? Change. Do you think she was incented to allow any changes to her systems at all, even if she thought they were good ideas? No, because it was, and she was a money-motivated individual as well, so that was money out of her pocket. Problem is, if we think about it, our driver is really the same thing, which is to sell shoes. I mean, provided that's what our company does, right? So the purpose of a developer is not to write code and ship features. The purpose of an ops person is not to keep the site up, only insofar as it services the greater goal of the organization, which is to make money. So we need to figure out how that happens. And if you've read the book, The Goal, that helps you understand that. And the thing is, changing these micro incentives is not always the right thing to do, because incenting people appropriately can actually help, because if you ship changes at a higher velocity, that actually does increase the stability of your system, right? And caring about uptime and stability does enable dev to ship more features because they're not caught up in troubleshooting. So again, they're complementary incentives, even though they may seem contradictory. And remember, people will always work towards the incentive you give them, even if it will destroy. And that's wow. I just forgot. What is it, Jason? What's it called? Nash, people working towards the incentive, even if it'll destroy their organization. Yes, the Nash equilibrium. So be cautious of that kind of thing. So the other thing is you want to make a change. You got to be a salesperson. So there's a book if you are a salesperson or work with salespeople called The Challenger Sale, and again can be condensed down to the whole book can probably be condensed down to this one quote, which is someone who's a challenger has a deep understanding of their customer's business, uses that understanding to push the customer's thinking and teach them something new about their company. So that's the same thing. You need to understand your company and your organization and be able to sell it to the decision makers, the people who are your stakeholders. And you might have to actually teach them a little bit about something about their part of the business that they don't even know. This is hard. If you don't like being a salesperson, find a buddy in your organization who does. And again, talk their language, right? So you want to look at your key influencer as a client rather than your boss for purposes of this, if that's the case. For example, if your client, who happens to be your boss, shoots down your ideas and offers a counter plan, right? You have to be ready to channel some boldness there and stand firm in your beliefs. So you don't want to necessarily argue back and forth, or worse, just back down because of their position above you in the company, right? But you could say something like, hey, I understand what you're saying, but if we go down this route, here's like some statistical information, right? Here's what is going to happen. And again, it depends upon the type of person they are, how you respond to that. But you have to talk their language when you're selling. And then the one thing that I really want to get into that's important is this idea of compliance versus commitment. So this is the problem with mandates. I can be the CIO or the CEO, and I can come down and I can say, this is how we're going to do stuff. Do it this way or you don't have a job. And you know what's going to happen? People will do what you say because they want to have a job, right? That's called being compliant. So the compliant one is a person who signs documents, they put their time in, they do their TPS reports, they punch the clock, and they might continue to do that even if it's something they don't believe in because they need the job, they don't feel like they have other options, maybe they're too lazy to leave, whatever is the reason. They'll make the changes, but they won't really care about it. They won't believe in it. Now, someone who's committed, they simply believe in the TPS reports because they actually do believe that this is the right thing. And they're dedicated to the idea of change, and they're committed to the success of the company. So as you have more commitment, the success of the company is exponential. And this is the one thing, to me, that goes back to the C in comms. And when we talk about people who talk about doing DevOps in the enterprise and why culture doesn't matter and it's for yogurt, they say it because they feel like you can't measure culture. This is how you measure culture. And unfortunately, you can't put a Nagios agent on your people to see how committed or compliant they are. You actually have to talk to them, and you have to evaluate them. But this is a metric to evaluate, is commitment versus compliance. Best change influencers are people who don't see people as something that you have to deal with, right? Their change agents are actively interested in people, and they enjoy the pursuit of the how more than the change itself. If this isn't you, then maybe you're not a change influencer, but you probably know somebody who is in your organization. They can help you. So be aware of that. If you look at people as a blocker and an annoyance, it's really hard to be a change influencer. And then finally, you know what? Bring people along for the ride. I've talked before about not dictating, right? So let your influencers and your stakeholders take part in that. Make your tent big. You know, if you look at the transformation that GE Capital did, they went through and they didn't just say this was a thing we're doing inside Dev and Ops. As they were building it, they invited security into the mix. They invited testing. They said, we're going to talk about this. And maybe you don't start by saying we're having the DevOps project and we're going to do this. Start by saying, hey, we have some brown bags once a month or every 2 weeks. We get together for lunch and let's talk about how things could be better. The trick of that is don't let it be a venting session, right? Like if you're going to do this, keep your arms around it. It's not just let's sit down and complain about how everything sucks. Let's, as a group, kind of figure out where are our pain points. We have to identify where the stoppers are, where our bottlenecks are. We can all talk about how we got where we are, but this is about moving the needle forward. We only care about the present and the future. We don't care about the past. So we got a couple minutes, maybe. Questions, comments, problems with your life? Great, and I'll put this up with a couple links, a couple things to reference. We did an episode of Rest of DevOps all about culture change. Talked about a lot of these items. I'm at Matt Stratton on Twitters. I'm Matt Stratton on the GitHubs, and then I also have the link to the TED Talk. And again, I think I'll put this all up later, and you can check it out. So, thank you for your time.